bit about that. Not today, but we're going to talk about because we got to talk about royalties, and we're going to get really knee deep in like what the financial end looks like. And I want to share with you kind of some of those stats and what those numbers really look like. But so like I'm in the process like mid campaign. I know you're on my Instagram, right? Yeah. So I know you see it like every week in that process. But I know a lot of you were not like collectively in each other's spaces. But I was just talking to Kai about her planned release at the end of. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So I'm really excited to see kind of like where this leads. But it's going to be really cool to kind of have that conversation because in the last class, neither I nor any of my students were in mid-release form to actually see it. A lot of them were about to start releasing. And so there's a lot of questions that kind of come into play when we talk about like how to release, what the release plan looks like. I had a student message me from my last class and he said, "You'll never believe that somehow I just became a manager of a band and they want me to manage them, and they were really just playing for fun, and now they got funding to go to the studio, and now I don't know what to do because like now what do we do? They're writing songs, they're working on music, they got all this stuff, and I was like, well, let me put a checklist together for you because I literally just went through a release in November, and there's like 100 things you need to be doing right now. And so we were having this really cool conversation, and I made this checklist for him, but of course it's kind of fun because everything I always develop, I usually bring back to the music business class. We can talk about what does it take to get the release. So I'm really excited to kind of share that with you. First of all, before we start talking about music business licensing, this is going to go kind of quick, but there's a lot to talk about in the aspects. So I'm sure I'm going to draw some funny, awkward pictures and kind of, talk your ear off about the overall positioning of how this works. But let's talk about music licensing. So in general, the first rule of thumb with music licensing, because that's kind of what our big key is today. The first rule of thumb with music licensing is you have to actually own the music. Kind of weird, right? But obviously super true. Like ownership, whoever owns the music gets to sell it. Okay? Well, that's why it's so important for you to be creators, essentially, and not spectators. In like the biggest realm, I see it. I used to teach at this college that had game design, and we had all these gamers, and they would like literally sit in this big room and play video games all day. And I'd go by and go, "Well, don't you guys design games?" And they're like, "Yeah, but like this Fallout 3 or whatever just came out or whatever." And I'm like, "Well, why are you spending so much time in this room when you could be in the lab making new games?" And it just baffled me. In the same way, if you're musicians, you should be making music, right? Sounds pretty ideal, right? Sounds pretty, like a deliberate model for making music. But the problem is that if you were to like, especially in this realm, once we get into performing arts, it's performing arts. It's not recording arts. And so like if you ask around and you're like, well, how many of you have recordings of yourself? We were just with Janelle and Chase. We went to the anechoic chamber of the engineering department in one of our classes. And we were with Janelle and Chase. And I don't know if you know Janelle. She's a singer. I don't remember her last name, but she starts singing. And I'm like, good, Janelle, that sounds awesome. And then I was like, let's talk about recording. Do you have some recordings? She's like, yeah, I have some recordings. And it's like, well, we need more, right? I mean, it's like, you think about it. It's like, if that's your product, your live performance, how many of you perform live? We got a good group of you perform live, right? Okay, live performance makes good money. Now, how many of you are making money at live performance? Obviously, if you're here, you're probably in transition. We'll just call it in transition, right? Okay, yeah, so it makes good money. You know what I mean? Like, you could make good money performing night after night, especially if that's your vision for what you're going to go do. But at the same time, what if instead we recorded your performance and then we essentially find ways to license it so that while you're sleeping, right, while you're out hanging out with your friends, that stuff's actually working for you. Does that make sense? Like that stuff's working in your favor. One of the things, sorry, hold on. Michael? Yes. Okay. I'm so sorry, Michael. Go ahead.
I meant to ask this a couple weeks ago, but going back to that guy you're talking about who makes whatever ridiculous amount of money just putting stuff up to the free music or the stock music sites.
Yes.
So, the way I understand it, is it just like each song is just an asset that for the rest of your life is producing income for you?
Yeah. As long as it's out there, and people want it, yes.
And he's created a ton of content, and he's getting it off ad play. Is how he's right.
Well, it's a combination of like he has his music on some sites that they collect membership dues, or they collect the ads. Yeah. And if someone on that site uses his music, he gets a portion of it. It's I don't know how they essentially like come down to the, but they split it. And, exactly. Now, this is like 5 years after he started the process that he's into the six-figure land, and he just keeps doing it every day. He just makes new music and puts it out there. Just to kind of go back to that idea, this is the music library conversation. Generating music for music libraries that could be used for corporations, that could be used for the university. It's like the university wants to make a video of anything, you know what I mean? Like that, they want to make a video of them kind of transitioning into this tier 1 thing with their research department. It's like they need music for it. Where do they get it, right? Now YouTube has what they call, like a lot of them say, they're royalty-free music. Well, the royalty-free part is not actually 100% true. Royalty-free music essentially just means that you don't pay the royalty. It doesn't mean the PRO doesn't pay the royalty. Does that make sense? Because the PRO still pays for the royalty. It doesn't mean it's open or public domain. It just means that the person who's buying it to use it on their video doesn't have to pay the royalty. They usually have to pay something else in some other way, which is usually a membership fee, or maybe it's run off of ads or some sort of collaborative, whatever campaign that they do. There's lots of different gimmicks to it. Ideally, though, his best advice was, if I'm going to make music for a music library, what I do is I just package it in a grouping, and it's not even genre based. It's like specifically what is the sound base. Like these are dark vibes. This is my dark vibe package, and maybe it's like dark vibe cinematic, and so it's all like strings and horns, and it's dark, right? Or or it might transition over to like this is my electric guitar pack, or like my jam pack, or it has a vibe to it. It's very particular, because the reason it has to be so is when someone searches it, like if I'm going to search some music for my video, I don't just go song, right? I don't just go happy. No, I'll go like, it'll give me all these things I can put in, tempo, key signature. If I don't know that, I'm dumb. If I'm outside of the box, if I don't know that and I'm outside of the musical box, then what I do is I just type in any mood I can think of. You know what I mean? Like you can just type in music that sells, right? And like they come up with this formula of like all the different moods that would fall into that category, and then they shoot them out so you can preview them. It's kind of interesting, but yes, that's absolutely what's happening. And that is through music licensing. So as long as you own it, you can license it. So let's talk about all that. So if you're making music, you should be recording music. You should therefore be filing the copyright. And you could do it if you wanted to do it once a year, once every 2 years. You can actually literally put in a catalog. The largest catalog I submitted was like ridiculous. It was like 120 songs in one catalog. So I just took one chunk of catalog, threw in one copyright fee, right? My one payment of $55 to register all of those works. Now, it's a pain in the butt doing that many at one time, because you have to have all the audio files, and if there's any lyrics or text or anything that goes with it, all of it has to go in, and it has to be typed in and brought in. But it's a process, yeah. That's probably like the largest one. Normally, I only do like 10 or 12 at a time. But if you copyright it, you own it. Now, do you have to copyright it? No, but if you're going to license it, you want to be able to show proof, because people won't often just buy it without proof of the fact that the copyright ownership exists with you. Because it can be very easily, like, well, think about it. I mean, there's tons of scammers in the world, and there's a ton of scammers that are going, yeah, I want to license my music. It's not my music, really. It's somebody else's, right? So I want to license my music. And then they get out there and they try to license music that they don't own. So, yeah, the legitimacy of the copyright is really just to confirm your ownership. Now, kind of looking at this, though. So there's a couple areas that I want to consider. First of all, and I'll say this. So there is another version of this presentation on Canvas, and I'm going to put this up kind of in its place. But just so you have some sense of awareness, I consolidated the snot out of this. So like the only things that exist on this presentation are the things that I want you to have in your notes. Got it? So like as you could short form these, of course. But in truth, like this is the content to me that matters, because this is how you make decisions based on it. Now, the only thing I didn't include in here, and we're going to talk about it, the funnels for like, I mean, where does this even come from? You know, your mom doesn't come down and go, hey, can I license your music? Right? No, you know, so like you have to network to gain it. So we're talking about the funnels and the drivers to it. First of all, though, this is where the capital is generated. If no licensing is done, the value of your work is zero. Okay, do you understand? So like if no licensing is done and you do own work, the value of your work is zero, because there's no licensing, so there's no proof or track record that it would license or would do anything at all. But what's really interesting is everybody has a license to do something. So all the fine print that you guys have ever read in any, or never read, should I say, all the fine print that you've never read in anything, when you signed up for Facebook, when you signed up for Instagram, when you signed up for YouTube, when you signed up for iTunes, when you signed up for any outlet that music is on the platform, you know, any one of those things. When you guys, you know, even when BlackBerries were around, I mean, it was the same process. There are license terms. You guys have probably all heard of them. You know, the license agreement for the device that you use. Well, what you probably didn't know is the license agreement actually details how you can use, or the fact that you can't use, music that comes through the device. So what you actually don't know is that like when you go onto Apple Music, you've agreed to a license type that you get to stream. In this agreement, you understand you're licensing the music to stream for your pleasure. And it ends at that single use. Does that make sense? At that just for me kind of thing. Technically, you breach the license as soon as you broadcast that. So like if you were to be streaming your music and you broadcast it in any way, shape, or form, really, truly, you fall outside of the license term. The license, so like easy way is like if I'm at a basketball game and I'm like, oh yeah, here, let's put my Spotify on the sound system. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well now all of a sudden we're in breach of license. Now, does anybody care? No, and no one would legally come and pursue you for doing such a thing. But if you ever did so at the Mercedes Stadium in front of a live NFL crowd, you would definitely be sued. I mean, it's so long as someone heard or found out about it that it wasn't licensed, because essentially there's a license that people pay to be able to do that, to broadcast any music in a large format. So like you have a license as just a listener, but you know, you accepted those terms, and most of you don't really breach them in any way, shape, or form. And if you think about it, the only company that ever really barks about that you see constantly are these sports stations. I don't know if you guys ever noticed that when a sports broadcast comes on, there's like this huge like moment where they tell you that you're not allowed to rebroadcast the, you know what I mean? I don't know if you guys ever noticed that, but in all other ways, shape, or form, though, that is still an illegal move if you did that to anything, right? You know, does it happen? Yeah. Does it matter? Sometimes no. Most cases no, right? But the owner of the copyright issues the license to a certain degree and can have thousands of active licenses. In terms of licensing, you could have 100,000 licenses in America, and then you could turn around to China and say, well, you know, if my music's happening in some way, shape, or form there, you could do the exact same thing in another country. So like there's a lot of depth to the license area. If you were licensing this much, you would definitely have to have a legal team and someone in accounting, because you probably wouldn't want to, you'd be going, man, if I license this much, how much more can I license if for the next 10 years I just did nothing but make new music? But you wouldn't want to get bogged down in like having to track down your licenses and find out if people are paying the fees that they agree to in the license. That wouldn't be fun for you. You'd want to hire an accountant to do that. You want to hire a team to be able to hunt down and track things like that. Now, you wouldn't even necessarily have to hire your own. There are essentially publishing companies that just do admin. And we talked about that 2 weeks ago. Publishing companies that do admin as a function, that's what they would be doing. They'd be handling all the licenses, making sure everybody's paying them, right? Now, Each license has its own limitation. So here's the key. You have to know the limitation of the license in order to understand how you should be selling or should be negotiating for the sale of a specific license. And this is where it becomes important. So like, yes, let's say I just own one work, okay? I own one work. The potential to unlock that work is my ability to understand the categories that we're about to go through in licensing and then seek to exploit each area or avenue of license availability. Does that make sense? And then once you do it once, you do it well, you do it again, and then you do it again, and then you do it again. And I mean, before you know it, you essentially have something to really talk about financially. So let's talk about those. Sorry, these are kind of small. Wait, hold on, did I? Oh, we did. Okay, sorry. These I want you to not write down in this instance because I'll just make sure you have all these because I bullet headed each one of these in the next system. So like each one of these has a page coming up. So we'll talk about each one. So you don't have to write these ones down. But I do want to talk about this. And for whatever reason, I didn't finish writing the terminology here, but it's actually pretty simple. The terminology inside of the license. So like one key you need to know when you go into talking or discussing or working with licenses, there are terms in all licenses that work with all license types that are the most important key that you need to know. Now we haven't talked about contracts yet. Contracts are by far one of my favorite things to discuss because contracts are like when you don't know how to play a game and you're intimidated by the idea that you don't know how to play the game. But then once you learn the game, you're like, damn, this is easy. And you're like, man, all you have to know are these key components. It's the exact same thing with contracts. Well, in those contracts, these are the key elements that you would see in the contracts for licensing that would be ridiculously important and super easy to cut through to go yes or no. So if I'm a small artist who has nothing going on and I don't really plan on having a whole lot going on, then I'd probably say yes to any contract that comes my way. Because in truth, you know, if I'm making zero and I'm doing nothing, and then I got a contract that wants to apply some opportunity, it might be a good deal for me from where I'm at, from my perspective. But if I have any skin in the game, these are the things that I'm going to weigh out and be able to go yes or no, yes or no, yes or no, right? So let's just pretend for a moment, let's pretend that you literally sit at a desk and your whole job is to just weigh out yes or no on deals based upon these terms. Okay? So let's talk about when and where and how, right? So license, and this is the big key, licensing in only certain aspects pays up front. Only certain license types pay up front. Most license types pay on the back. And that's why we have to discuss, this is essentially where those payments would come from. But the first question always, is the license exclusive? Why would that be a big deal? What is exclusivity in terms of the contractual element? What does it mean? If I'm exclusive in a contract for a license, what does it mean?
Nobody else can use it.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody else can use it, nor can I sign. Nobody else can use it. I can't sign anything outside of, otherwise I'd be breaching this particular contract. Well, okay, that could be fine. So think about this. Okay, so like, give me a yes or no. Okay, so I want a license from you, your work. I want a license from your work to put your work on my video game, right? But I would, you're not anybody that I know. You don't have a whole lot of clout. I kind of have the advantage to put you on my video game. I want to sign an exclusive for the video game. Okay, let's not worry about the license term just yet. Let's just say it's a 1 year. Pretend it's a 1 year exclusive, but there's no pay. There's
How
no
big is the
royalty.
video game?
There's no royalty, huh?
How big is the video game?
Let's say it's huge. Okay, let's say I don't even know what's huge right now. What's big right now?
2K.
Sure, yeah, that works for me. 2K.
Yeah.
So let's say you're on that game, you get no pay. It's exclusively. It's the only thing you can sign to for this 1 year.
The only
In
thing
video
that
games?
but only in video games.
Mm-mm.
No, the only thing. Period. No.
Yeah. Okay. So let's back it up. Because see, this is where it kind of comes into play. We have to weigh this out. What if I did say,
I mean, for a year.
no, what if I did say it was exclusive, but yes, it was only for video games. You can do anything else outside of video games.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But
Okay, what if I made it a 5 year?
no. 5 years?
5 year. No, right? Right? Why?
That's too long.
Yeah, because you're giving it away for free. What if I made it a 5 year, and what I said is, we're going to give you 2% of sales. Well, hold on.
Of 2K?
Of 2K.
Oh,
Yeah.
all of 2K?
Of the 2K game.
Yeah.
Okay, see, that's the key right there. You see what I'm saying? 2%, is not a lot, but we're talking about like a big game that's going to be making millions of dollars, right? And so all of a sudden, 2% is a number. It's a real number, right? It's not $10, right? Okay, let's back it up. We're not going to do the back end. Instead, we're going to pay $5,000 up front. Okay, we'll do a 2 year. $5,000 up front, 2 year.
Yeah, I still do.
Right? Exclusive.
So, just so I understand, when you say exclusive, like, can they go on iTunes and buy the song too? They obviously can't.
Yeah. You can essentially the license would only you can get license restrictions all the way up to not being able to even sell the song. But in truth, that doesn't drive the product. So what they prefer to do is they prefer to have the artist be able to sell the song, and more importantly, be able to promote the song laterally towards the game at the same time, so that if the artist was ever big enough to drive traffic, they would have the leverage to. But they wouldn't be able to even get big enough if they never had the release go out most of the time. So it's in the benefit of the game to just say that's cool. It would not be in the benefit of the game though if that's what they were doing, and then the artist was like, well, now my music's in a commercial. But it would be in the benefit of the game if that commercial happened to be their commercial for the game, and then it would make total sense. But that's the problem is like the reason they would want exclusivity along all lines is because if they put you in the game and then they put that version of the music in a commercial for the game, and then you signed on for another commercial, it deflates the strength of the. I mean, if you ever seen a song ever be in 2 commercials at one time, which is almost unheard of because of exclusivity, but it would kind of deflate the idea that this is kind of a cool thing. So now, why did you make certain decisions or certain elections as yes or no when it was on the table? What's the Joshua? What are you thinking of? Sorry, this one. What do you think about when you're leveraging should I or shouldn't I?
Will I get money off of it?
Yeah. Yeah. And what's the other? So, Mickey, what's the other part?
What is it called? You get out there. People hear your music. Then they'll look exposure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exposure. Yeah.
Am I right? Is
Yeah. Exposure. So, will you make money? Mickey says exposure. What's the opposite? What's the opposite balance of the other side of it? What's the other balance of it? You guys are on one side of the balance of it. The 4.
To me, that's all that matters. I don't really care about the 2% or the $5,000, or if you have a 2K game that's dropping, your music's in it, and literally game developers after that 2 years is up, and other people are going to be calling you offering a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what was the downside to 5 years?
5 years would be. I suppose that you might burn out.
Yeah.
Like
You're not
2K
releasing
isn't.
anything
I mean,
for
like nobody
5
cares
years.
about 2K7. Because that was 12 years ago.
Well, okay, but I like that. But what else? What's the other thing that's missing here? Well, the time, yeah, but what's wrong with the time? Somebody else have it?
Didn't you say when you release it is the most popular time of the song? So
Right.
in 2 years or 5 years be somewhat irrelevant, unless you have a classic song.
Yeah, well, okay, so that's huge. Yeah, that's huge. Although, let's just say, if you were nobody, and that's the key. When you're nobody, although your most impactful moment will be release day, if you're nobody and nobody knows you, and on release day you don't release a lot, right? And so what's the in the 5 year? Because I like what you're saying. In the 5 year, what's the risk? I guess what is the risk?
I mean, in 5 years, if you release again and nobody listens, it doesn't matter because you're not getting any more money because the contract is up.
Okay, I don't think anybody. Okay, go for it. Mickey.
I'm sorry. So say you're contracted to do 2K15, right? Now you might get contracted to do 2K16 and 17, so it might be a reoccurring deal considering they pump those games out.
So, okay, the only thing I hadn't heard, what was your name again? Makai. The only thing I hadn't heard, and I didn't know if you guys are thinking about it, like while you're looking at it, in the risk, you're talking about the money to gain, but what about the money you might lose when you're boxed out or you, I mean, here's the thing, because here's the thing, okay? If your song, if 2K's looking at your song going, this would be really cool for us, you have to sit down and go, well, who else might like this? Before you just jump in and go, well, who else might this be cool for, and who else might like it? The other thing you're not thinking of, that we just have to keep in mind on the front end, we have a product, but how much did it cost to make? You see what I'm saying? The product wasn't free. How much did the product cost to make? Because actually, Michael, you were saying this kind of about like, yeah, does the song lose its value over the time, which is super important. Question is did we spend a couple $100s on the song, and we expect that the next song we do we're going to spend more budget, or did we just spend $20K on the song, and this is the only time we're ever going to spend that much money based upon our results from what's going to happen here? Because if we don't get good results, we won't get funding at that level again, and we'll be kind of back to funding our own, which is what artists kind of go through. They kind of go through this, like, there's always a moment where they're about to pour a lot of money into it, and it's going to be the litmus test as to whether that's even worth it anymore. And that's kind of the weird part. So I love it because all you guys are really thinking clearly. I like your thought though, because you're kind of back to you hit it right on the head, right, when you said 5 years is realistically probably too far. It's probably so far that it wouldn't matter, which would make the difference between a 3-year and a 5-year, maybe if they were going, we only want a 5, and you're like, well, I want a 3. And like, we only want 5. That's it. Then it might be, it might be worth it. And Mickey's exposure opportunity, I think, would be good. Yeah, Mickey.
Also, like, I know a lot of jazz artists used to do this. So, like, they were contracted to play on one album for, like, Blue Note Records. Then, they would go use an alias. And so you wouldn't know this was Charlie Parker playing, but it really was him. Like how Michael Jackson did, I think the Michael Jackson video game, like SNES, but he didn't actually put that he did it because that would have caused a lot of legal issues.
Yeah, well, and it's funny that you mentioned that because that's very true. That's actually what Hans Zimmer, if you ever followed Hans Zimmer, he had like a weird moment where like people were like, well, Hans Zimmer wrote the music for the Pirates of the Caribbean, but then why in the second movie is it the same music and it has another composer's name on it? I don't understand what happened. And it was the same issue. It wasn't a ghostwrite. It was just clear that in his exclusivity contract, he was just not allowed to put his name on another film inside of the terms that he was working on. He was working on another film completely. He was not inside his terms allowed to put his name on any other film until that film had released. Pirates came in the middle of it. He took the job. He got the pay, and he had another composer assist him with it, and he let that composer take the namesake for that performance. And it wasn't ghostwriting per se because it was visible. Everybody knew it was happening because everybody's first question was what happened, and it was pretty clearly out there. But it's kind of in the exclusivity lane. It's like there are terms of exclusivity that may only box you out from using your likeness or your name. That might not even prohibit you from even performing or working or even releasing something outside of just using your name. So there are leveraged points. In most cases, if the exclusivity wasn't from a record label or a publishing company, you could absolutely even write for other people for them to release and still be the person who's making the money and has the ownership and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of comes down to ownership. Obviously, the ownership's important. There are some license terms that transfer ownership. There are some license terms that are such a big license, record deals, publishing deals, that literally, as soon as you write it, you transfer ownership over. Now, you still receive royalties. You just no longer own it on either a work-by-work or an overall case. The downside to ownership exchange. Obviously, you don't own it, right? That's probably part of it. But the big downside to ownership exchange is really just the fact that it depends on if it's a one-off or if it's a licensed term grouping, meaning like in the next 6 months, all of my work ownership, that anything I create in the next 6 months gets transferred over. And that becomes kind of a problematic zone to be in as a writer or a creator because 6 months is nothing. You know, it's most likely a year or 2 years. But the problem with it is that like, well, what if you write the greatest song that you ever wrote? So then you kind of have to bury it and pretend you never did, and then wait for your 2-year period to unleash and hope that it's still relevant so that you can, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of what happens to writers when they get boxed into the ownership as a kind of blanket ownership pool. So the ownership is key. The license term, you guys obviously understand. How long the duration kind of balances out the weight of the overall. Like, is it a long term? Is it high yield? Is it, you know, and that whole balances pretty well. I feel like you guys kind of caught that pretty quickly. But the royalties, when I mentioned 2%, on royalties, it's a game changer in how royalties are divvied up. And the question mark is when they're divvied up, how they're divvied up, and essentially what is the time frame for like when the expectation of generating money exists and for how long. Kind of in the same way you were saying 2K from what? 2K7?
2K7, yeah.
Okay, which I'm not familiar with, but if the license term was, let's say the license term was 3 years, and the royalties pay out after 90 days after the close of the first quarter for the company that's making sales on the license term. And let's say that when they look at it, their projections only really show a good first year, and after that, it's not really that strong. So then the royalty calculations that have to be made by whoever's licensing it have to include the idea that, kind of like what Michael was saying, there's a projected peak, but then a tail off. So they can't look at it as a blanket. And that's kind of one of the problems with, like, most people have a natural tendency to look at the best financial outcome of a situation and use that as the guide. So, like, great example, because I have friends that do this. I have friends that, they're like, yeah, we want to flip houses, you know, because it's a popular thing. You're like, yeah, I want to flip houses. And they look at every positive example of flipping houses and how much money it could yield. And that's how they, like, make their decision on whether or not it would be a good business model. But they don't look at, like, well, okay, but what are the long-term effects? How many houses can you flip at a single time? How long is that duration of transition where you own the house and then you're remodeling the house and then you're selling the house? You know what I'm saying? Like, what is the big picture month by month? And that's kind of what you have to look at in royalties. So we're going to actually look at an artist worksheet that I created that basically walks you through the generation of royalties on a month by month. We won't do it today, but we will be looking at it soon. The goal is to be able to, you need to be able to, from a royalty standpoint, if you're making music and that's like your actual like financial income that you're depending on, you want to know what you're making on a month to month. You want to be able to expect or project on a month to month, which means exclusivity might be out the door for your certain case. Excuse me, because you might be looking at it going, you know what? I know every month I need to make $5,000, so I need to be hustling with my licensing, right? Or finding ways to really make it work for me. And then reporting and accounting. So here's the weird thing about this whole thing. So there always is a clause that talks about how the reporting and how the accounting will be worked out and when it'll be worked out and at what value it would pay. So like in the reporting and accounting, it could say all this wonderful stuff on the upper side, but down in the reporting and accounting, it could say, you know what, because of reporting, we will only do reporting and accounting annually. And what most people don't catch about that is that means if they're not doing reporting and accounting until an annual benchmark or position, that means they won't pay the royalty until the reporting and the accounting are complete. Does that make sense? So like if you're licensing to a company that doesn't plan on doing the reporting and the accounting, even if they were doing the reporting and the accounting for the game, they weren't, like, we'll go back to the game, but they weren't doing the reporting and the accounting for the music they licensed until after the first year, then there's no way you're going to get paid before that first year because they would just send you money they didn't account for or do the reports for. Does that make sense? So like it's not hidden, it's really just it's a thing that most people don't, they get all the way down to here and they're like, love it, love it, love it, love it, cool, let's go, right? And they don't go here and go, oh, I'm going to have to hold out for a whole year before I see anything. What is the problem what would be the real problem in not seeing a report until your first year?
Not being able to pay your rent.
Well, okay, yeah, but yeah, I love it, Kai. What else do we got? Something else that might be important about this.
Losing inflation.
Well, yeah, but let's what would reporting give us the opportunity to do if we knew what the reporting said?
Invest it if you get it back.
Yeah, essentially, and we might want to go. You know what? We have a product on the line, and we can see the stats, and they're terrible. What can we do to make a change, or we're already in it. We're already in a deal. We're stuck in it for a little while. What would it be our best foot forward to try to make those stats change? If you knew what those were on a monthly, it's helpful. If you knew what they were on a quarterly, it's a little less helpful. If you didn't know them until a year out, you'd be sitting there going, you know, it's all good because this is going to pay my bills. It's all good because this is going to pay my bills. 12 months later, here's your $2, you know. And then you're like, oh, crap. Well, I had no idea how poor. What were you going to say, Mickey? Did you have something to offer?
Well, I was gonna say I know like a lot of the instructors at UNLV, they'll be part of like a musicians union, who that union actually goes out and finds like if their record has been played by this company, or so like they actually have like other people doing the recording job of, you know, where your recordings are and your licensing and stuff like that.
That's cool. I mean, that's a great way to do it. I mean, in truth, that's kind of what some of the offices that exist as larger entities, like literally like BMI in not just PRO land, but the PROs just happen to have the largest offices. But the Harry Fox Agency, Sound Exchange, things like that, they literally have offices that like all they do is the search for that kind of stuff. But it's not as organic as that. That's kind of cool, actually, if you think about it. That's a great idea. Well, the other thing that they also get to do is they also get to police and monitor their own. You know what I mean? Like if someone was jumping outside of the union to do stuff that should be inside of the terms of the union, it'd be very clear and be easy to isolate because of because they trust each other to communicate about that stuff, which I think is really cool. I love that. That's awesome. Any other thoughts before we go into the fun stuff? Okay, so those are the key terms. I think my battery just died. Those are the key terms. Oh, maybe it didn't. No, maybe it did. Come on, buddy. You can do it. Hold on. Sorry, I have batteries here, but for whatever reason, this thing's not. These are, performance license. This is your first license type. I do want you to write this. This is super easy, but this is something that will be on the midterm exam. So this is something that's super key, and it's often misinterpreted, misunderstood, mostly just because the definition is not in the name. I mean, it is, but it's not. It's just not the right kind, should I say. So this is a license used to allow for broadcast via radio, TV, streaming, satellite, any way, shape, or format that really does a broadcast. This also does cover or blanket. And it's kind of interesting how this works. This does also cover or encompass cover artists in the performance. And so, like, what the weird part about it is it's like the performance license is issued typically after the recording is done. But if someone goes and covers the song, the performance license still falls back to the owner. So, like, the ownership license terms still apply, which means that, like, if you're confused by that, that means that, like, my music on YouTube makes the same value if I perform it as it does if you perform it for my music. Like, I still get that rate to me. The difference is that based upon the amount of views that you receive, you may actually have to pay essentially a rate, a mechanical rate, in addition for that to me to be able to use it. But in turn, It just means that like there's no less. I don't receive less just because you performed it if it's my work. Follow me? So like I still receive same amount of money, which is why like people are always really excited about cover artists and that's why it's so heavily pushed. It's like, think about it. It's like, why are people so into cover artists? I mean, why? It's not just general people. It's the fact that every record label wants to push and promote cover artists because they're just covering things that already exist in the catalog that they don't have to pay for. They don't have to pay for those cover artists to make the videos. They don't have to pay for the cover artists to record the song, right? Normally, for a label or a publisher to make money, they have to fund something. They don't have to fund marketing. They don't have to fund recording. They don't have to fund any of the logistics, any of the legal. They don't have to fund any of that. It literally just funnels back. But it's all because of this. So the performance license, of course, allows for the broadcast. But it's not. It's weird. It's the playing of a recorded work. So like what's meant by performance is like someone literally pushing play on the work that's already recorded. Follow me on that? Commonly confused with the license to actually perform a song, which in turn, there is no license. You don't essentially establish a license for you to go play a song. So like if you're an orchestra, that license is from print. But if I'm a live artist and it's just me and acoustic guitar, I don't have to go pay for a license to go play a song at the House of Blues by somebody else. I don't pay anything. In turn, who pays for that? We talked a little bit about this when we were into PRO land.
House of Blues.
Yeah, the venue. So the venue pays a blanket fee for essentially people that play other music that doesn't belong to them, reported through their venue. Yeah.
So who would pay for like let's say somebody went on American Idol and they perform a song. Who pays for that song? American Idol?
So American Idol would pay the PRO fees.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually as the difference there is that it's not just a recording of the work. Or I'm sorry, it's not just a performance of the work. It's a recording of the work. So like when someone sings for American Idol or The Voice, there's multiple licenses taking place because they're not only audio recordings that are then sold on iTunes and Apple Music and Spotify that put out the audio recordings, and then there's a video recording, which essentially is, a live performance. So there's multiple sync licenses that are taking place in order to make that exchange. So there's an overall cost associated with that. So they're actually paying a use license. It's custom, but they don't pay zero for it. They definitely pay out for it. But it's worth it to them because in the overall big picture, it's, And then, but see, at the same time, again, kind of falling back, you're on The Voice, you sing a cover song, The Voice is paying the fees and the licensing. If that hits radio, PROs pay the rest of that because the radio has to pay the license. The radio is paying the license to get it. In the end, the original artist is still making the same dollar value because they make that cut in the back end from the performance license. So it's a really great system for artists. Mechanical license. So this one's tricky and it's weird. It's like, for whatever reason, this one becomes difficult because there are mechanical licenses. So there's a performance license and a performance royalty. There's a mechanical license and a mechanical royalty. Well, if I said there's a performance license and there's a performance royalty, what would the performance royalty be?
If somebody performed your song, or if they played your song somewhere and you got the money for it.
It's the money for the performance, yes, essentially that fell with the license. In the mechanical license, what do you think the mechanical royalty would be? In the mechanical license, the mechanical royalty essentially is
if somebody remakes your song and then you get the money for it.
Essentially, yeah. So, well, here's the weird part, though. Let me walk you through this. In the mechanical license, the mechanical royalty is for the mechanical license. But the catch with it that makes it so freaking confusing is this. A mechanical license is based, sorry, I'm going to start doodling now, is based on this. Reproduction. Basically, if we were talking CDs still, which some artists, I went to Target the other day and I was surprised that there was still a row left of CDs there. But this would be, if you considered it as a, actually, I'll write it this way. if you consider it a duplicated tangible, a duplicated product, then it has a rate. That's the rate times however much product.
So like vinyl?
Hmm?
Like vinyl too?
Yeah, vinyl too. Any you can think birthday cards, anywhere that it's fixed and then duplicated. Now the reason this gets so squirrely is because there's in the mechanical license, in the pre-2000 era, this was paid in advance to the artist. In the post-2000 era, this is withheld until sales are generated. This is based on physical, or it's still paid on projected digital. Gets kind of weird. So let me just kind of explain this to you. So like if you put out an album in 1994, if the record company decided they were going to make 100,000 copies of that, they owe you the rate of the mechanical royalty times 100,000 copies. So, and they owe you that no matter what, because they generated that much product. That's how the mechanical license steps in. In the post-2000 era, because they're really not duplicating anymore, everybody moved to this, well, we can't afford it as a record company to do such a thing, so we withhold those sales figures until we actually have the sales numbers that go along with it, and then we distribute your mechanical royalty. Unless we're going digital, and in the digital vein, we have an expectation for what we have to project the value of what we think we would sell. So if there that's sales only, not streams. So if we were like, hey, we expect to sell 10,000 units digitally, which is actually a lot these days, they would say, all right, well, we are going to pay you the rate in advance times the 10,000 that we expect to be sold in digital land. We talked a little bit about that. We were talking about cover songs, I think 2 weeks ago. A little bit. That kind of it locks in. But here's the key. This is the point of sale license. This is the point of sale license that gives whoever's essentially duplicating or replicating or multiplying essentially the product to actually make the sale. Those sales figures then fall back to the artist or to the label to be split with the artist or whoever owns the ownership of the copyright. Just remembering that in the ownership of the copyright, if I own my work and I push and promote it myself, I'll get all the money. But if I sign off my ownership of my works to my record label, to my publishing company, then there is a already pre-planned, pre-negotiated split percentage that I would expect to be paid from what these rates become. So like, let's just say if in the mechanical license earnings were $20,000, it just comes down to what I signed on for if I'm with a record label, and they're like, no, we get 50% of it. So then, okay, that 50% falls to me. That sounds good as long as I'm a single artist that has no one else to pay. But that becomes a little rough if I have a manager who's taking 15%, and then I have 3 other band members to share it with, right? So it's a trickle effect. You'll see kind of how those numbers play out. But this is the big key. Performance license was for what? Pushing play, right? The broadcast. Mechanical license is for what?
Reproductions.
Yeah, well, reproductions mostly for the point of sale. Think of it as like this is the point of sale exchange. So if it's streamed, if it's bought, if it's sold in any way, shape, or form, those are the mechanical license functions that have to be signed. So do I have to, if I'm making my own work, do I have to make my own mechanical license contract? Obviously not, right? If it's my own work and I own it, I own master rights. Master licensing rights. I own all of the rights, which I can do all this without a single signature for anything. But as soon as I say, hey, you and I are going to make a company together, right? I'm going to be an artist, right? But we're going to make a company. As soon as there's a division I have to, in order for us to be in the same company, I have to sign off mechanical license. I have to sign off performance license. For me to work then, so that this is the big thing, for me to then work with a distributor, for me, like an actual distributor as a distribution deal, mechanical license have to be signed. So those are the places for exchange that are typical. Print license, this one, don't overlook it. Because print like you'd be surprised how many people would kill to have something other than the typical that they could play with their orchestra or ensemble that wasn't just the run-of-the-mill stuff. One really big popular vein, I talked about this a couple weeks ago, is marching bands. Because marching bands have one job. I don't know if you know what a marching band's job is, but marching bands have one job. It's not to sound sad and weepy, is it? You know what I mean? Like, they don't go out there and go, only unless, like, they needed to. But what is their goal? Their job is to what? Hype people up. So they're not going to be playing all this down-tempo stuff, right? They're out there, they have a very specific genre base, but at the same time, they have a huge need for creativity in that genre base because there aren't a lot of people out there doing it, right? So print work targeted at specific locations or specific elements are very, very important and very, very good ways of generating money through the license if you can find the right niche, you know. I mean, again, it does also depend on what your song is. That would determine whether or not it's even acceptable for a print license. Yes.
In the marching band, they like have to do this all the time. We'll play like pop songs and stuff like that, but there won't be scores to them, so they'll have to buy the rights to the song, but then they'll have to transcribe it from the actual recording, and then we'll play it.
Well, and in truth, if anybody, I mean, that's a business model. Technically, that's easily a business model. If any one individual was able to do that and then literally just sold that score, well, as if they were the print licensor, if they had the acceptable use for the print license to just distribute that score based upon sales to other marching bands, I mean, it's like if that's a need, and you're saying there's a hole, there's like a gap where that stuff has to be done. It's like, maybe every marching band in the world has a couple people that are super excited about that, but in truth, if they needed it right now, why not be able to go online and find someone who's selling it? So that kind of, again, it's like if you could get the license to sell the printed work as a marching band variation or arrangement, I'd say go for it. You know what I mean? Because it's a business. That's a business model if there's a need. Specifically, think about that. Like, is there a target? If you were to create a specific arrangement for marching bands, are there marching bands that would play it?
The thing is, like, they're all musicians, so we can transpose it ourselves.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Transcribe it.
There's no need to purchase it, so we can do it.
Well, no, in order for them to play it in the stadium.
I know, but like.
No, I think but it kind of, see, here's the key that kind of goes back to it is, it's not legal to play it without the print music. That's the kicker. I don't know, it just depends on, like, I don't know how even universities are audited, but I do know when it comes to like school usage, they have to be, in order for them to be able to compete at certain competitions, they have to be able to show proof of the ownership of the works. It'd be the same way with an orchestra competing in an orchestra competition, that actually has to show proof that they own licenses for every seat. So like if they were just playing in their own stadium, not a huge problem. As soon as they go out and start competing, it's like if they're going to do that work, they have to be able to show proof that they paid for the rights to use. But you're right. Maybe that's the downfall. Maybe that's in the end. People, it's like if you could just do it yourselves in your head.
I mean, we do that a lot. Yeah.
It's like one of our things we have to do.
Really?
Yeah, like it's we just have to do it.
Well, interesting. Sync license. This one's a fun one. So you probably know what this is. So in the sync license, this is one of the very few character categories that you get lump payments up front. This is the reason why you get a lump payment up front is because the PROs pay out from every location except for what? Almost. Yeah, where? At the theater. Because the PRO doesn't pay PRO performance royalties at the theater, sync licenses have to pay you up front. I mean, I've seen sync licenses be like $100,000, and they would use like 30 seconds of a song. 30 seconds of your song, $100,000. It's upfront. You don't wait for it. It's not a 90 days past close of quarter. I mean, it's upfront. So in the end, Back in Black. I think about that. What was that other? There's a Beastie Boys song, Sabotage. That one's been super popular. But you kind of look at like when these people are syncing their music to a film, most people are thinking, oh, the exposure, but you kind of forget that that's an upfront fee. You know what I mean? Now, if you're a millionaire, that doesn't really mean a whole lot. But like if you're on the rise, that's a good chunk of money to start working with. You know what I mean? The sync license will only make money on the back end when what happens? Sync license only makes money on the back end when what happens?
When it's played, like on TV.
Yep. TV, YouTube, if they release a soundtrack, right?
One like cool thing I got to do this winter break is I was able to go to 21st Century Fox Studios, so I was able to go to the Family Guy recording session,
Oh, that's cool.
and like I got to watch the guy composed the entire score for the show, and then they had to run it with like a live ensemble and everything, with the video playing, and I mean they had to be so detailed about the glass drops here, so the trills have to stop at this exact moment. It was like milliseconds, and they were like really worried about audio from the characters and then the media that they were putting in. It was it's a lot to go into syncing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, how did you get access to that?
Dave Lowe, the jazz professor here, he took me out.
That's cool.
He's the pianist for Family Guy.
Dave Love is?
Yeah.
No way. That's fun. Yeah, okay, so so sync, I mean, here's the thing. Sync is different than being a composer for a work. So sync, here's the key categorization. Sync means that the work was created and generated outside of let's just say either outside of the need for the film or independently funded, completed in an isolated form, and then submitted for sync to the film. It is possible, though, in most sync cases, you made a song, your song's out there, or it's coming, they essentially pay the fee in sync to bring it as part of their work. But in a lot of cases, they'll say, you know what, we like this artist. Pharrell is a great example because in his works with Despicable Me, it was a sync deal on the sync works. So they said, hey, we want you to write works that are going to go with this film. But they didn't pay him up front to do it. They paid him for the sync license after the music was created, but then they included him as a composer for the composition of the film, and those are two different sets of fees. The real difference is in a sync license, so here's the key. I don't know why I didn't put that up there. Biggest key in a sync license. Well, that's why I didn't put it up there, because in most cases this applies. The biggest deal in a sync license, you keep the rights to the work. Once you become a composer, it's a work for hire. So if you're composing for film, it's a work for hire. You no longer own the work. So like if Disney buys it and they put it in their theme parks, you may make a back-end royalty off of it based upon your contract that's negotiated, but you're not making lump sums of money for people to stand in line at Disney and to listen to your work, right? So that's kind of the downside to doing it as a work for hire composer versus doing it as a sync license, stuff that you generate on your own that is then brought into a film. Does that make sense? So there's two different paths. Yes.
So if you sell it as a sync license and then they buy it and play it at Disney, what kind of license is that?
Special. It's most likely it's a performance license. Most likely it's a specific performance license to the part. It could fall in the standard performance license rate and not actually cost them that much. In truth, question.
Are there artists that market just towards this, just for the upfront payment, and that's all they do? Yeah.
The sad part about it is so here's the problem with this, okay? Because we have a lot of artists in the room. This is a high dollar item, and you only have to make. If you think about it, there are licenses in sync that are out there between $1,000 and $100,000. So if you're thinking about it and you're doing the math, you're like, okay, well, if I only need $50,000 to live, then I either need 1 at $50,000 or 5 at $10,000 or 10 at $5,000 or anywhere in that range. And unfortunately what happens is artists go way hard at this before they're at a point where people would go, oh, I know that artist, it'd be cool to have them in our film or in our game, and then they pursue that artist and they pay them that fee, and then they begin to regularly earn that. The difference is if like someone, like just as an example, if I'm like, all right, I want Aerosmith on my film, okay? Well, is there an expectation that they're going to sound like Aerosmith when they make their song? Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the person who's handling the music supervision for the film already has Aerosmith in mind. So it's kind of easy to go to them and say, all right, we want either a song of yours or can you create a song for this that'll go in sync category. And they have an idea for what they're doing versus a music supervisor who's going, I want someone who sounds like Aerosmith on my film, and then a band who's just trying to make sync license dollars who doesn't sound like Aerosmith is trying to make themselves sound like Aerosmith to do the pitch for the sync. And then when they don't get it, then they have to move on to the next. What's the next pitch for the sync? So unfortunately, the downside to the model is you can go online. There are sites that'll show you what they're called pitch sheets. And basically what they are is like, okay, we're a company that works as music supervision to a bunch of people who need music in LA for films. Here are the categories we need. And I get these sheets and they're so stupid. It's like, yeah, we want a 90s era something that sounds like TLC. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's definitely not me, right? So like I'm not gonna jump through hoops and make that sound just to get that sync. You know, $15,000, yeah. But I would not even come close. There's no freaking way. You know what I mean? Like there'll be a sync out there that someone just needs polka music. Okay, totally not me as well. You know what I mean? Like authentic polka music must speak Portuguese. It's like, okay, well that doesn't make any sense. So the downside to the model is yes, you could totally do this all day, but you have to kind of have enough clout where people will go, well, we like what you sound like. We want to have your sync. You know what I mean? Like you have to be somewhat established where they want your sync.
Build yourself up first and then.
Yeah, so they come after your sound versus you having to chase what they want, which is just ridiculous. It's kind of heartbreaking in turn because you spend all this time and effort trying to do such things, and then meanwhile you're not generating your sound. You're kind of like you're really all over the board chasing your own tail. Now, on the other side of that, my brother-in-law is a good friend of, I don't remember the guy's last name, Danny somebody, but he does like the majority of the music for film trailers that you see. He does a whole slew of it. And it started out where he just got these small opportunities to make a little music for a film trailer and for a movie trailer. And he developed a sound that eventually, like all the people that were in Hollywood were going, well, if we want a film trailer, we send the trailer portions, the video clips, the people to a special house that does the bringing together the storyline. And then they basically, in turn, hire out for this guy's sound because everybody wants this guy's sound. Because it's kind of almost universal, but what it is it's more like it's always super epic and it's always on point, even though it's always different. But it's always targeted towards whatever's happening. So if it's sci-fi, it's way sci-fi in the lane. If it's a little more just like if it's Fast and the Furious, it's way more like real life oriented, but still heavy in that emotional vein. But he has a sound, and so they pursue him for it. And he's making tons of money off that kind of stuff, So like that's his world, And they're really think about it. How long is a movie trailer music? You know what I mean? It's going to be 60 seconds or less in most cases. So, it's impactful, and they pursued him for it. But if you were to go try to make movie trailer music and do it in the opposite fashion, you're kind of just spinning your wheels without finding your sound. So that's kind of just the negative drawback to it. It is absolutely possible. It's definitely possible. We don't get, and we live in Vegas, so it's a little difficult. We don't get the same kind of activity for sync licenses. Part of the sync license, let's say pitch options or opportunities is really made on face-to-face pitching cycles that happen in LA. So like when someone goes to pitch for a sync, they don't just send out an email and they don't just say, hey, look at the song. They don't go like, hey, look at my Spotify. That's not how the pitch is. Literally like someone goes in to Fox, Fox, whatever they're called, Fox. Where did you go? Yeah, that's what they're, yeah. They literally go in there and they go like, okay, you guys have films that need music. Here is the array of the things that we're looking at that we suggest. And like they literally pitch for like TV shows, TV show after TV show. They like go in and they pitch directly targeted to the market of whatever's going on in that TV show. So if it's Grey's Anatomy, it's going towards that lane. You know what I mean? Like if it's, any other sort of like weird tangent, like, well, there's a lot of superhero TV shows. They're all going to go in that lane, but they're done face to face. They're not done like through a phone call or through an email or through let me mail you something. And that's why we don't get that activity here. You know what I mean? Because we don't have that direct access here. So in sync world, you really have to have someone moving or negotiating for you, pushing for you, promoting in LA. So that's kind of like one of those things you really have to have a strong pull for. In the master use license. Okay, so this is the most expansive. This is the one you would sign if you're on a record deal or if you had a publishing deal. So this would be the one this would be the big one that you'd sign off on. Master use basically gives you blanket use of all license types. It's directly associated with the record deal, and you wouldn't sign a record deal without it. Meaning, like, there would be no record deal without it. In truth, we call it a record deal, but it's really called a recording agreement. But there would be no recording agreement without it. There would be no publishing deal without it, without master use, because they would never want to go back to the artist every stinking time and go, oh, can we do a license here? Can we do a license there? They literally want to just say, hey, we're taking this whole thing and we're going to move it. You know, like all of our offices are going to get behind this. We're going to find you sync. We're going to find you, we're going to manipulate or exploit for performance. We're going to move the mechanical. We're going to go into print. You know what I mean? Like you're going to wake up one day and you're going to go to Target, walking down the toy aisle, and you'll hear your song, sung by Alvin and the Chipmunks, whatever it is. I mean, it's like that's how they promote and do it, but they have to do it through the use of master use. Yeah.
Chris Brown just signed a deal with, I don't know who, but that says that he gets to keep 100% of his masters. So does that mean that they have to go back to him every time and ask him, all these different
No, what the master, so like the master, it's really interesting how that works. What happens in the masters is that like two things. There are the actual physical masters, and when you do a record deal, you never see them. Like if I'm an artist and I sign a record deal, I go in the studio, I do my recording, I don't walk out with a hard drive. You see what I'm saying? Like I don't actually get any of that stuff. Like if I want my music, they give it to me as like a, they give me my music, but if I really want quick access to it, it's like I'm streaming my own music like everybody else is, right? Because I don't get to walk away with it in any way, shape, or form because I have no ownership for it. In terms of the ownership of the masters, all it would mean is that after the term set forth by the recording agreement, he would then be able to do whatever he wants with his music. So that's kind of essentially what the Ray. If you ever watched the Ray Charles movie, you've seen the Ray Charles movie, probably. Yeah. That was the biggest thing because that was like the first time anybody really ever did such a thing and said, "Hey, I want the masters," which meant that they could then. It's almost like they're a free agent. Once their record deal's over, they become a free agent. They all of a sudden have in hand. They got their works back. And that, again, it's pretty unheard of. You know what I mean? Britney Spears doesn't own her masters. You know what I mean? It's like big artists don't own it. They don't even expect to, The only downside to it, though, so the downside to it is you almost always want, the only reason that it would be healthy to have your masters is if you needed to renegotiate or negotiate for more money as if you were a free agent. You know what I mean? Like you could then say, okay, well, my 5-year term with Capitol is over. Let's go ahead and see who else could buy this and which way we can manipulate it in what shape or form. The problem with it is in truth, if that did not happen and you couldn't get buyers on board or buyers weren't really excited because of that process, or if they were deterred from it, then all of a sudden your catalog falls flat and you're selling your own catalog. You begin selling your own catalog, which might be the idea. Maybe he wants to be able to build his own business around selling his own catalog. But so that's the only downside to it because most people that are at that level are totally fine with just letting the whole publishing company realm and the record label push and promote day after day after day because they don't have to do anything. You know what I mean? Like they could stop performing. If they finish their cycle that they promised them, they could just be done performing, and the publisher's going to be out there pushing it from then on to the rest of their lives still. Because they'll look at the catalog and go, well, we have a valuable catalog. Let's just continue to find ways to put it out there, right? So, you know, it could be helpful, but I'd be very interested to monitor to see if that really does much. In Ray Charles's day, the difference was when a record label was done with you, they would shelve you. Like in his day, it was like when the cycle was over, like you didn't see those guys again. You know what I mean? Like you didn't see this resurgence. You know, it wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a legacy artist. There was no such thing at the time, really. It was like, no, when your cycle's over and the record label's done with you, they still own you, and they get to put you on the shelf and just say, we're not going to push and promote you anymore. And that was the big deal then. It's not the same anymore because every publisher knows now. It's like things will sell all day. You know, if it was ever a hit once, we can make it a hit again. You know, and we can find new ways to do it. This is okay. So like this is the last slide. This is the last of the boring, tedious slides. In the realm of licensing, this is the dirtiest of them all. And it carries somewhat of a dirty connotation because of it, but it is unfortunately the one license that overrides some of the other license types. So in a mechanical license, you have to have my approval to get the mechanicals. In a performance license, you have to have my approval if I'm the owner to get the performance license. In a master use license, same deal. The compulsory license is the override to that. So the government basically a long time ago said, well, if someone wants a license to use, they can use it as long as it's been publicly released. So as long as someone's released their work and it's out in public, anybody can license it. Without the permission up front from either the artist or the owner of the label, blah, 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 so and so, blah, blah, blah. So the only downside to it is they then have to pay the highest statutory rate for licensing that exists. So when you're negotiating for mechanicals actually give you a lower royalty rate option. When you're negotiating for performance, same thing. You get these lowered royalty rate options, almost like discounted options. In print music, you could literally negotiate with someone who owns a copyright to get a value that works for both of you for the license. In compulsory, you basically are just paying the copyright owner like the highest level of value that you possibly could. In the compulsory, the downside to it is if you do not notify them within the 30 days of the intended release, you are in copyright infringement. At that point in time, you can be sued for the full value and beyond. So the compulsory is a little bit dodgy, and in most cases, the compulsory can still be fought. It just depends on how the work is used, whether or not a label would be super not into it, or But in most cases nowadays, see, it was different. Go back 20 years, cover songs. Like you could only get a cover song if you were already part of a label, and that label owned the catalog. So if the label owned the catalog for some work that already existed by somebody, and you fell inside the same label, inside the same catalog as an artist, they would go, well, since it belongs to our catalog and we want you to promote our catalog, we're going to have you cover a song inside of that realm, from Elvis or whatever, and send it on its way. And that's how the cover songs were done at the time, because it made them money. Now that everybody's doing covers, the compulsory license isn't really considered a huge issue, because most people are more than happy to say, why get a compulsory? You could get a mechanical. We'd give it to you. You know what I mean? You'd pay a mechanical rate. But I was doing research on cover songs in the fall, because I had an artist that was working on some stuff. And I mean, the mechanical royalty for expecting to sell like 5,000 units was like $300. So it was like, wait. So on a single song that's popular, I could get the one that I had was oh gosh, All I Want for Christmas, right? Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas, $300 to get the rights to resell it, re-record it, do the whole package. From a mechanical standpoint, it was like $250. It's like, that's nothing. If I only sell 5,000 units, it's $250. If I sell 10,000 units, I just pay $500. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just have to up the mechanical royalty rate. That's nothing. It's cheap. So most publishers are way more inclined to do this, because in the end, they make if you pay the mechanical license, you get the mechanical license fee plus the performance license fee that comes on the back end from the PRO. So it's like, why not? Why even bother with this? But this one's kind of one of those things that's like, the reason a compulsory could be enacted is if like the artist had political or religious differences with the use of where it was supposed to be applied. Does that make sense? So like if well, this is happening a lot these days, where like an artist has a song and someone's whole political campaign is centered around that song, and they're like, please don't use our song. There's not really, realistically, there's not a whole lot that they could do. As long as they're paying for the royalties, they could use a song all day. Shoot, Donald Trump could do a cover of a song, for some opposing, I don't know who an artist that opposes Donald Trump is, but Pharrell, yeah. If he wanted to, he could get a compulsory and do a Pharrell. He could go do Happy. He could do his own version of Happy inside the White House. You know what I mean? And like, he technically, as long as he's paying the license for it, it's legitimately okay. Yeah.
So if you wanted to release a parody of a song, how
Yes.
would that work?
Parodies fall, so really cool. This is YouTube, so this is a great question. YouTube has a really good educational video, may I call it, that talks about how parodies work. And it might even be worth watching if we have time later. Because there are things that fall inside of the terms of limitation for copywritten stuff that don't require you to file a license. And some of those things fall under reporting or commentary, like news. Parody is one of them. If you were using it as a means, I think of like explaining, like if you were like, it was a Weird Al video or whatever, and it was already in parody form, it becomes complicated because you're like, okay, well that is parody, so what do I do if it's a parody of a parody? It doesn't make sense because it almost looks like I'm ripping it off. But in truth, there's still ways around that, because if it's just like you're somewhat giving commentary to it in the process, it still falls into this like weird, clear, like you're totally okay category. Yeah, but it's in truth, like, yeah, parodies, that's why you see parodies. Parodies are awesome because people don't have to sit around and file compulsory. They don't have to, it's not a cover song. It's not compulsory. You know what I mean? Now, does it seem illegitimate that someone could take someone's song, rewrite the words, make it funny, and then make money off of it? Yeah, to a certain degree, but then you have to also remember, performance license still follows it. That's the key, is the performance license still follows it on the PRO on the back end. Yeah.
Weird Al always asked, like he asked LL Cool J to do one parody. He always asked. I mean, he pissed off a couple of people, but he always asked.
I will say this, I was really confused. So maybe you could clarify this, because I was, Weezer put out the song Africa. They put out a cover album.
Right.
And they put out the song Africa. Did you see the YouTube video?
I've listened to it. I haven't seen the video.
The YouTube video basically says Weezer with Weird Al. But then I watched it, and I was waiting for Weird Al to come out, and then I was like, was he in the video somewhere? And I just didn't catch it. So maybe you should check it out and tell me if maybe he's supposed to be the lead singer in
He's
the.
just burned out now.
It was just the weirdest thing. I was just like, I never saw any Weird Al events. It was literally the song.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we'll figure that out.
Check it out.
But you know what? If we have time, Joshua, we can check that video out. It's super enlightening in terms of how YouTube looks at infringement. They have a lot of videos that kind of show like certain things about that, but there's one that like is just real simple that kind of gives that info. What I want to do now, this was our last one of the licensing realm. I want to take a break because when we come back, I want to start getting into groups and start talking about what's coming up for midterm, so you have a plan. And I want to begin tonight so that you literally have detailed tasks. You have a run list of who's doing what, and you don't have anybody that you literally go, hey, this kid's not doing anything now, and then we can fix it instead of 2 weeks from now when it counts for grade. So, cool? Let's take 10. 10? Yeah, let's take 10. Good.